Well, Reserve Bank Governor Michelle Bullock yesterday repeated that the next move by the RBA is uncertain, whether it be up or down. Overnight, the Canadian Reserve Bank has become the second major Western economy to start cutting interest rates. Our business editor, Ross Greenwood, is with me now. So, Ross, does this move give us any clues about what might happen here?
Well, it kind of does in some ways, Laura, but it seems as though Australia is on a different path than many of the other economies around the world, including New Zealand, including the United States, including Europe, including the UK, where interest rates have been increased much more aggressively than what they have here. The same thing had happened in Canada, and as a result, their economies have been pushed into recession. But this is what they did overnight. The policy interest rate, the cash rate actually went to 4%, but the policy rate went down by 0.25% to 4.75%. Now, the important thing about this is that it is the second major country around the world after Sweden, which has got different circumstances, to cut interest rates. And so it was kind of instructive to see that while interest rates had been raised very, very rapidly, it was a situation where rates are coming down perhaps more gradually. Have a look here, say, for example, the comparison between Australia and Canada. Here's our cash rate, 4.35%. Theirs higher, 4.75%. The inflation rate here remains higher than what it is in Canada. In other words, the higher interest rates that they've had have had a bigger impact on bringing inflation down much more quickly. We can see this in other parts of the world as well. If we go here, have a look at Australia, but have a look at the United States. Have a look at their inflation rates broadly have come down much, much lower, and their cash rates are much, much higher. As I say, it seems here that the Reserve Bank is on a different path, a different strategy, if you like, to try and hang on to jobs, to try and keep the country out of recession. But last night, the Governor of the Bank of Canada spoke about just how quickly rates might come down after having risen so rapidly.
When we raised rates rapidly, we were in a situation where inflation had moved up very rapidly, and we needed to raise rates rapidly to control inflation and bring it down. The situation now is quite different, and our own forecast has inflation easing gradually back towards the 2% target. So what that suggests is that the future path of interest rates, while it's reasonable to expect further cuts if inflation continues to ease, given that it's likely to ease gradually, the path for interest rates likely to be gradual.
Okay, so does this make it likely that other countries would also start raising rates before we do?
100%. And I'll tell you, the European Central Bank is probably the first off the rank. It's likely to potentially go as early as tonight. So you can see where Australia is sort of out of sync as an economy. Now, this is for better or worse. One of the reasons for it is the Reserve Bank, remember, has got this new remit to try and hang on to as many jobs as it possibly can. And so in many ways, the Reserve Bank is prepared to wear higher inflation for longer on the prospect of trying to hold as many people in jobs as they can. But that means that interest rate cuts become further off. Have a look here. You can see it with the flat economic growth that we saw yesterday. So you can see just how flat it is now going back over a period of time. And it really is very, very anemic growth here in Australia right now. Not quite recession, but only barely above an official recession here in Australia. And then have a look at it on a per capita basis. So for the past 5 quarters, Australian households have been going backwards in their own economic terms. And that's the reason, because remember that the consumption from Australian families makes up about 50% of Australia's economy.
Right, so does it affect anything else then, Ross?
It really does. It affects the Australian dollar, because the Australian dollar, if Australia's economy is out of whack with other economies around the world, then what happens is our dollar will generally tend to rise. So the reason for that is that if Australian interest rates are higher relatively to other rates around the world, then money is going to come here chasing the higher interest rates that we might have. So even though the dollar's come off a little bit, it got close to 67 US cents, naturally that Australian dollar should start to creep higher as you start to see more interest rate rises in other parts of the world as compared with in Australia.
Right, okay. Seems like a good point to ask how the share market is tracking this morning.
Well, actually, it's had a cracking start to the day. And the reason for that is because of records on Wall Street overnight, including that company you talk about, NVIDIA, that makes those chips for artificial intelligence, has become the first company in the world to be valued at more than $3 trillion, which is about not far off as much as we've got in superannuation in total here in Australia.
Wow.
So there's the benchmark index here. It's up broadly, the ASX 200, by more than 0.5%, and that is entirely off the back of what happened on Wall Street overnight.
What a story that is. That has been quite a meteoric rise. Now worth more than Apple, is that right?
That's exactly right. So more than $3 trillion, the very first company in America, indeed probably in the world, to be worth that value.
And in how long? Just a year or
If we
less?
think about this, I think the share price is up by more than 80% in the past year, and then gone pretty much 80% the previous year as well. Remember, I can remember the big thing in my head is that the profit for one quarter was $14.2 billion, which was up 700% on the previous quarter last year. That's the number that sticks in my head.
Oh, you should have probably told us about that a couple of years ago, Ross. Thanks very much. Thank you. We'll see
Talk
you
about
soon.
it now.